Imagine hitting an absolute wall in your career. And I don't mean just having a rough week or a project that didn't pan out.
Right. It was a minor setback.
Yeah, exactly. I mean a total paralyzing existential burnout. Like you feel completely hollowly empty.
Oh, man.
You're financially strained to the breaking point. Your most recent projects have been these humiliating public failures. And you were just sitting there, staring into space, utterly convinced that your best days are permanently behind you.
That is a terrifying place to be.
It really is. The well is just dry. You have absolutely nothing left in the tank.
And it's a very specific kind of psychological terror. You know, it's not just a creative block, it's a total crisis of identity.
Oh, for sure.
Because when the very thing you've built your entire life around, the skill you believed actually defined your worth as a human being, when that suddenly feels impossible to execute, you don't just lose your work, you lose yourself.
Exactly. You lose your anchor to reality. And that is exactly the dark, suffocating place where Gustave Flaubert found himself in the winter of 1875.
Yeah, which is just wild to think about.
It is. Now, for you listening, you probably know Flaubert as the famous 19th century French author of Madame Bovary.
Right, the absolute classic.
Yeah, he is legendary, mythic almost, as this grueling, agonizing perfectionist. I mean, he's the kind of guy who would spend days, literally days, just pacing around his study, screaming words out loud to test their rhythm.
You would literally shout them to see how they sounded.
Right, just trying to perfect a single sentence. But in 1875, that incredible, formidable literary engine just seized up completely.
It really did. It was a profound breakdown. And the context here is absolutely crucial to understanding why.
Because it didn't just happen out of nowhere.
Exactly. Flaubert wasn't just tired. He was grieving, he was aging, and he felt like he was failing on every conceivable front.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today on this deep dive is to explore exactly how Flaubert cured this massive, seemingly insurmountable writer's block.
It is such a fascinating cure.
It really is. We are going to explore how he pulled himself out of the abyss by writing a very small, seemingly simple book containing 3 distinct short stories.
Right, 3 tales.
Yeah, 3 tales. Or raconte in his native French. And we are taking this journey with you today, curating all the most fascinating, visceral, and surprising details from these texts so you don't have to wade through the massive original volumes yourself.
Okay, they can be quite dense.
Oh, absolutely. So we're going to uncover how this tiny literary life raft actually became one of his greatest masterpieces. We'll look at what a humble, uneducated servant, a bloodthirsty medieval saint, and a ruthless biblical queen can teach us about the human condition.
And honestly, what they can teach us about getting unstuck.
Yes, because it is a remarkable journey.
It is, because to really appreciate the cure, you have to realize the crushing weight Flaubert was carrying in 1875.
It was a lot.
It was immense. This wasn't a young writer facing second novel syndrome. This was an aging titan who felt the culture had completely passed him by.
His recent stuff just wasn't landing.
That's not at all. His more recent, massive, exhaustive novels like the historical epic Salammbô and his sweeping contemporary narrative, Sentimental Education, they had been critical and public failures.
Yeah, they just didn't hit that cultural nerve the way Madame Bovary did.
Precisely. They were viewed as just too dense or too cynical for the public at the time.
And alongside this professional rejection, his personal life was basically collapsing, right?
Oh, it was a total disaster.
Yeah.
His financial situation was ruined because he had bailed out his niece's husband. He essentially bankrupted himself to save his family.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he was losing close friends to illness left and right. His entire inner circle of literary giants was dying off.
So he's completely isolated.
Completely isolated. And if that wasn't enough, he was working exhaustively on a new novel called Bouvard et Pécuchet, which is this massive, soul-crushing encyclopedia of human stupidity.
Wait, he was literally researching idiocy.
Yes. He was immersing himself in human idiocy all day for his research. And he broke. He was on the very edge of a complete nervous breakdown.
He literally had to stop.
No.
Like, he packed his bags and went to the coast, to Concarneau in Brittany, to stay with a friend just to recover his nerves.
He needed a total reset.
And we actually know exactly what was going through his head because Flaubert was an obsessive letter writer.
Thankfully for us.
Right. We have these extensive, incredibly vulnerable letters he wrote to his family, to his niece, and to fellow legendary writers. especially George Sand.
Oh, she was a dear friend.
Yeah, almost a maternal figure to him. And in one of these letters, he literally writes that he feels completely empty.
The heartbreaking.
He tells her he doubts he has the ability to even string a single sentence together anymore. Literature, he said, had stopped believing in him.
That phrasing is just so telling.
Isn't it?
Literature had stopped believing in him. It's the complete inversion of agency. The loss of faith in his own voice was just total.
So how does George Sand respond to that?
Well, she's trying to pull him out of this spiral, so she essentially tells him to write something simple, something to please people, something comforting.
Just to get the gears moving again.
Exactly. And to rehabilitate himself, he makes a fascinating decision. He decides to put the massive, complicated, depressing novel away.
Good idea.
He tells his niece that he is just going to write a tiny story, maybe 30 pages.
30 pages.
Yeah. He says he's doing it merely to occupy his mind and to see if he can still construct a sentence.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you and push back on this right away.
Oh, go for it.
Because there is a massive irony here, and I simply do not buy his excuse.
You don't buy it.
Not at all. This is Gustave Flaubert, the ultimate perfectionist, the man who treats prose like it's high-stakes diamond cutting.
That's true.
And he says he's writing just to occupy his mind, as if he's doing a crossword puzzle on a Sunday. I don't believe for a second that it was just a casual exercise for him.
You're absolutely right to challenge that, because it is entirely a psychological trick he is playing on himself.
A trick.
Yeah. When you are paralyzed by the expectation of greatness, you have to lie to your own ego.
Oh, I see.
By lowering the stakes, telling himself it's just 30 pages, it's just a little childhood memory, it doesn't really matter. He removes the crushing pressure of the great novel.
So he tricks his brain into starting.
Exactly. Sure. But here's the brilliant part. His perfectionism doesn't vanish.
Of course not.
Flaubert is incapable of not being Flaubert. So instead of disappearing, his perfectionism actually gets hyper-concentrated.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it like a watchmaker. If you are building a massive grandfather clock, there's room for error, there's room for grand sweeping movements.
Yeah.
But Flaubert restricted himself to building a microscopic pocket watch. Every single gear, every comma, every syllable, every rhythm of every sentence had to bear the absolute weight of his genius.
Oh, wow.
Because he removes the pressure of a massive, sprawling plot. His genius for language, for that exact crystalline prose, is allowed to flow into a much tighter, more pressurized container.
And the proof that this wasn't a casual exercise is in his actual process, right?
Absolutely.
Because he writes these letters from the coast, saying he worked for 16 hours straight one day. 16 hours. Just to finish the first phase of a short story.
Unbelievable.
16 hours on a few pages. He was striving for this absolute ideal of exactitude and musicality in his prose.
He couldn't help himself.
No. What started as a little mental exercise to kill time on the beach ended up taking him a year and a half of grueling labor to write this incredibly small book.
Which, by the way, is an insanely long time for 3 short stories.
Right, compared to other writers back then.
We have to remember that most of his contemporaries, who were working for literary magazines, they had to churn out entire stories in a matter of days to meet serialization deadlines.
Dickens comes to mind.
Exactly. But Flaubert afforded himself the terrifying luxury of agonizing over every single syllable.
And it wasn't a linear process either, was it?
No, not at all.
He didn't just sit down and write 1, 2, 3. He started the second story, then got stuck or inspired and jumped to the first, and then began planning the third.
He was weaving them together thematically in his mind over those 18 months.
But for the sake of sanity, let's start where the reader starts. Let's look at the first story he finished.
A great place to start.
This one is drawn directly from his own childhood memories. It features characters modeled on his own family and a servant who worked for them for 50 years. It's called A Simple Heart, or Un Cœur Simple.
It is a supreme masterclass in quiet, devastating realism.
Devastating is the right word.
And it's unique in this collection because it's the only one of the 3 tales set in Flaubert's contemporary era. It's set in the provincial Normandy he knew so well.
Right.
The title is quite literal, though it carries a double meaning. Simple here refers to someone who is uneducated, poor, completely marginalized by society, and seen as totally insignificant.
But there's another layer.
Yes, it also refers to a pure, straightforward, almost stubbornly enduring temperament.
And our protagonist is Félicité. She is this humble, illiterate servant working in a provincial town for a very austere, strict, and frankly cold widow named Madame Aubain.
Very cool.
And for you listening, you really have to try to picture the texture of Félicité's life. It is defined by total, unreciprocated servitude, back-breaking physical labor, and a constant, unrelenting drumbeat of loss.
The loss is just staggering.
It is. She was orphaned early. Her father fell from scaffolding. She was abused, falsely accused of theft, and chased away from a farm for a measly 30 souls.
Just brutal circumstances.
And just when you think she might find a sliver of happiness, she gets her heart completely broken.
The heartbreak is a defining psychological moment for her, and Flaubert renders it with such gritty precision. She falls in love with a young man named Theodore.
Yeah, they meet at a local rural dance, and Flaubert gives us this very grounded, tactile scene.
You can really picture it.
They are walking at night, and this enormous hay wagon is swaying in front of them in the dust, blocking the road. Theodore corners her and promises to marry her. He basically becomes her entire world.
But then,
to dodge the military draft, he abruptly marries a very rich, much older woman who can buy his way out of service.
it's so callous.
Félicité is totally devastated. She cries in the fields until dawn, packs her tiny bundle of clothes, and ends up at the doorstep of Madame Aubain.
And from that moment on, Félicité functions almost like an automaton in the Aubain household.
Just going through the motions.
Exactly. This is where Flaubert's sensory details become the actual mechanism of the story. He doesn't just tell us she works hard. He paints a picture of a life lived entirely on the absolute margins of human existence.
Oh, the details are incredible. You want to talk about the genius of writing about almost nothing.
Let's hear it.
Flaubert describes her eating the leftover breadcrumbs off the table with her finger. She doesn't even get a plate.
Just the crumbs.
She wears this plain, hospital-like apron with a bib. Flaubert writes that by the time she's 25, she looks 40. And by 50, she seems ageless.
Like she's made of wood.
Yes. She becomes just a silent woman made of wood, moving mechanically through the house. She takes the kids to school, polishes the pots until they shine like mirrors, does the heavy laundry in the freezing river, and sleeps in front of the hearth with her rosary. She is basically part of the architecture of the house.
What's fascinating here is how Flaubert uses these objects, the pots, the breadcrumbs, the rosary, to map her consciousness.
How so?
Because underneath that mechanical wooden exterior, he shows us a woman with an enormous, almost desperate capacity for love.
A love that goes nowhere.
Right, a love which she constantly pours into people who inevitably leave her, ignore her, or die. She transfers all her devotion to Madame Aubain's children, Paul and Virginie.
And there's this incredible scene that perfectly captures her devotion, the famous bull incident.
Oh, this scene is a masterclass in pacing.
It really is. So they are out walking in the pastures, going to another estate. The atmosphere is really tense. And suddenly, this massive bull charges them out of the fog.
Terrifying.
Madame Aubain and the kids are frozen in sheer terror, trying to scramble out of a ditch. But Félicité doesn't panic. She just steps between her family and the bull.
With no weapon.
She doesn't have a weapon. She literally starts ripping up clumps of dirt with her bare hands and hurling them into the bull's eyes to blind it, screaming for the family to run behind her.
She's totally fearless.
She backs up against a fence, the bull's foam splashing on her face, its breath on her skin, and she slips through the bars at the last possible second.
We have to pause and look at how Flaubert writes this.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanics.
He slows time down. The syntax of the sentences actually mimics the heavy, lumbering charge of the animal, the rapid, desperate actions of Félicité.
It's very cinematic.
It's cinematic before cinema even existed. But the true psychological insight comes in the aftermath.
Right.
For years, the town talks about this heroic event. But Félicité never shows a single ounce of pride. She genuinely doesn't realize she did anything heroic or special. It was just her job to protect them.
Her simplicity is her armor, but it's also her tragedy, right?
Exactly. Because her love is so absolute and unassuming, it is never truly returned in equal measure. She's completely taken for granted.
It's just one heartbreak after another. The son, Paul, goes away to school and basically forgets about her.
Typical.
Then the little girl, Virginie, gets sick and is sent to a convent for her health. And Félicité practically worships this little girl.
She really does.
When Virginie makes her first communion, Félicité is in the church, and Flaubert describes how her imagination takes over. Félicité feels as if she is the one wearing the dress, her heart beating in Virginie's chest.
Total empathy.
But then Virginie dies of a lung ailment at the convent. Félicité spends 2 nights alone with the corpse, kissing her face, cutting a lock of her blonde hair to keep forever.
And we see this relentless pattern repeat. Flaubert is really testing the limits of human endurance here.
How much can one person take?
Right. After the daughter dies, Félicité redirects her love to her nephew, Victor, who is a sailor. She walks miles and miles just to see his ship leave the harbor.
But of course.
But Victor dies of yellow fever in a filthy hospital in Havana.
Oh, it's just relentlessly sad.
When she receives the letter, she is absolutely gutted. But what does she do? She doesn't have the luxury to break down.
She has to keep working.
She just goes down to the river to wash the laundry, beating the clothes with her wooden paddle, projecting all her grief, all her rage, and all her agony into the physical labor. The sound of the paddle hitting the wet clothes becomes the rhythm of her grief.
Everyone she loves vanishes. Her world gets smaller and smaller, physically and emotionally. And then we get to the parrot, Lulu.
Yes, Lulu.
I love this part, but it's also deeply bizarre. A local baroness leaves this exotic green and blue parrot at the house, and when all her human connections are gone, Félicité pours the entirety of her massive, bruised heart into this unruly bird.
Lulu becomes her whole world. And Flaubert, true to his realist instincts, doesn't romanticize the bird at all.
No, the bird is a menace.
Lulu bites people. He scatters his waste everywhere. He mimics the annoying sounds of the household, like the creaking door or the fishmonger.
But to Félicité, he is a companion. He is almost like a son or a lover or a friend. She lets him climb all over her.
But because it's Félicité's life and Flaubert is merciless, tragedy strikes again.
Naturally.
The parrot dies. She finds him dead in his cage from a cold. And she is so devastated by this final loss that she has him taxidermied.
She gets him stuffed.
She gets him stuffed. And as the years go by, Félicité starts to age rapidly. She loses her hearing, and then she loses her sight.
Her world is shrinking.
Her entire physical world shrinks down to the space of her small, dusty room under the roof, which is filled with religious trinkets and old cast-off items from the household. It's like a museum of her trauma.
And right in the middle,
on a bracket, is the stuffed parrot.
this is where this psychological depth of Flaubert's realism becomes truly profound. And it's why this story is a masterpiece. Flaubert forces us to look at how we create meaning. As Félicité goes deaf and blind, her understanding of the world becomes entirely internal and symbolic. She can no longer interact with the outside world, so her mind begins to merge the objects in her room.
The objects start blending together.
She actually starts to conflate the stuffed parrot with the Holy Spirit.
It's a brilliant insight.
She sees a cheap religious image of the Holy Spirit in a church window, and she realizes it looks more like Lulu with his bright colors and wingspan than a traditional white dove.
And she rationalizes it.
Yes. She thinks to herself, well, the Holy Spirit couldn't be a dove because doves can't speak. It makes much more sense that God, who is the Word, would use a parrot.
It's a brilliant insight into how faith operates in a mind that has been completely marginalized by society. She doesn't understand complex theology. She creates her own deeply personal theology out of the only thing that ever brought her comfort and didn't leave her.
The parrot becomes a vessel for the divine.
Flaubert is asking us, is her faith any less valid because it's attached to a moth-eaten stuffed bird?
I mean, I have to ask you, reading this, I felt deeply conflicted.
How so?
Is this the ultimate tragedy? Is it a pathetic, almost mocking portrait of a lonely, discarded woman hallucinating over a rotting piece of taxidermy? Or is it a beautiful, triumphant portrait of a woman who achieved a state of grace and genuine happiness through her simplicity? Because when we get to the final scene, she is dying of pneumonia, breathing her last breaths while a religious procession passes outside her window in the courtyard.
The ambiguity is exactly the point. Flaubert doesn't give you an easy answer. He constructs the final scene so perfectly that both interpretations are completely valid.
It's breathtaking. The air is filled with the smell of incense drifting up from the street. Her breathing slows down to a rattle, and as she exhales her final breath, she believes she sees, in the opening heavens, a gigantic parrot hovering above her head, welcoming her.
It forces the reader to confront their own cynicism. Julian Barnes wrote a whole famous book called Flaubert's Parrot because this specific image and the mechanics behind it are so haunting and resonant.
It sticks with you.
Félicité had no money, no status, no education, a life of endless unrewarded labor, and yet her capacity for devotion was staggering.
It's a quiet story, but it hits with the force of a sledgehammer.
It really does. It makes you question what you actually need to be fulfilled, or how much of our intellectualizing just gets in the way of genuine connection.
And that quiet reality, that deep dive into the psychology of ordinary suffering, is precisely what Flaubert needed to ground himself. He proved he could write beautifully about almost nothing.
But he wasn't done.
No, he was just getting started. If a simple heart is rooted in the quiet, dusty reality of his own childhood home and the passive, internal devotion of a servant, the second tale swings violently to the absolute opposite extreme.
Oh, it's a massive shift in tone.
Oh man, does it ever. We go from a quiet provincial kitchen where a woman quietly accepts her fate to a bloody mythic fever dream where a man tries to violently conquer his fate. The second story is The Legend of Saint Julian the Hospitalier.
Such a powerful piece.
And it was actually inspired by a stained glass window Flaubert used to stare at in the cathedral of his hometown, Rouen, when he was a boy.
Exactly. This is a traditional Catholic myth set in the Middle Ages. But Flaubert doesn't just retell a Sunday school story. He takes the framework of a medieval saint's life and applies his intense, modern psychological realism to it.
Though it's much darker.
Much darker. He treats the saint not as a holy figure, but as a deeply flawed, potentially psychopathic human being grappling with the death drive.
It's basically a profile of a serial killer who becomes a saint.
That is exactly what it is.
We start with Julian's birth to wealthy feudal nobles in a massive, peaceful, idyllic castle. And right away, Flaubert introduces the mechanism of fate. There are two prophecies at his birth.
Right, the conflicting prophecies.
A mysterious hermit appears to the mother in the moonlight and says her son will be a saint. But the next morning, a bohemian beggar appears to the father in the fog and says his son will be an emperor and a man of blood.
So from the very beginning, Flaubert establishes this massive tension between supreme grace and ultimate violence. The parents hide the prophecies from each other, but they both spoil Julian, treating him like a demigod.
Setting him up for disaster.
And as he grows, that seed of violence begins to sprout in chilling, incremental ways. Flaubert is showing us how a monster is made.
It's the descent into psychopathy, honestly. Flaubert writes it like a psychological thriller. It starts incredibly small, which is what makes it so disturbing.
Tell him about the mouse.
Yeah, Julian is in church during Mass, and he sees a little white mouse dart across the altar steps. It bothers him. Not because it's a mouse, but because it's a living thing moving without his permission.
It's about control.
So the next Sunday, he waits with a stick, lures it out with cake crumbs, and whacks it. He sees the drop of blood, tosses the body out, and tells no one.
Notice how Flaubert is pacing this. He doesn't start with Julian killing a bear. He starts with a mouse in a sanctuary. It's a progression of sensory experiences for Julian. He moves from the mouse to a pigeon on the castle wall.
Right, he hits the pigeon with a stone. It falls into the moat with a broken wing. Julian climbs down, and Flaubert describes the moment he strangles it.
It's so visceral.
Flaubert focuses on the mechanics of the kill. The convulsions of the dying bird make Julian's own heartbeat faster. It fills him with this wild, tumultuous pleasure. When the bird finally stiffens, Julian actually swoons.
Swoons.
It's an addiction taking root. He is getting high off the power over life and death.
And his father, thinking he's just displaying the noble masculine traits of a great hunter, fuels this addiction. He buys him an insane, almost comical arsenal of weapons and animals.
The cataloging here is wild. Flaubert loves a good list, but this sounds like an arms race.
It really does.
24 greyhounds from the Barbary coast, 17 pairs of Breton dogs, Tartary mastiffs as tall as donkeys, 8 bulldogs that eat wheat bread and aren't afraid of lions, falcons from the Caucasus, from Babylon, from Germany.
It's excessive.
But Julian rejects all the normal, gentlemanly, aristocratic ways of hunting. He doesn't want the pageantry. He goes out alone, day and night, in the freezing rain, drinking from muddy streams, killing bears with knives and defending himself against wolves. He becomes completely feral.
Which leads to the climax of his bloodlust, the infamous massacre in the valley. Flaubert creates a scene of almost surreal, hypnotic carnage. If you read the French, the rhythm of the sentences actually speeds up, mimicking the repetitive mechanical action of slaughter.
It's a total trance. Julian finds this valley shaped like an amphitheater, absolutely packed with deer. They are trapped by the geography.
They can't escape.
Flaubert describes their breath smoking in the freezing fog. Julian doesn't even aim. He just starts firing arrows. It's a massacre. The deer are screaming, climbing over each other, creating a literal mountain of bleeding, entangled bodies.
It's horrifying.
Julian shoots until his arms are exhausted, standing there in the red light of the sunset, covered in blood, surrounded by hundreds of dead and dying animals. The slaughter has lost all meaning. It's pure nihilism. And then the survivor appears.
The Black Stag. This is the pivot point of the entire myth, where the psychological thriller crosses over into the supernatural. Across the valley, a monstrous black stag with a white beard appears, alongside a doe and a fawn.
Julian, operating on pure automatic reflex, shoots the fawn. The doe cries out with a human-like wail, and he shoots her right in the chest.
He just can't stop.
Finally, he shoots the massive black stag right between the eyes. But the stag doesn't fall. The arrow is planted deep in its forehead, but it just keeps walking toward Julian.
So eerie.
Julian is paralyzed with an indescribable terror. The stag comes right up to him, bends its knees, closes its eyes, and speaks.
With a human voice.
With a solemn human voice, it curses him. It says, "Accursed. You will one day assassinate your father and your mother," and then it dies.
It's a horrifying self-fulfilling prophecy, because from that moment, Julian's psychology inverts. He was obsessed with dealing death, and now he is terrified of himself.
He's afraid of what he might do.
He drops his weapons and flees the castle in the middle of the night. He is so afraid of his own capacity for violence that he runs away to avoid hurting his parents.
He becomes a wandering mercenary. And he's incredibly successful saving empires, fighting armies of Scandinavians in fish scales, and warriors riding red donkeys.
Very mythic imagery.
He eventually saves an emperor and marries his daughter, a beautiful princess. He lives in a marble palace. He has everything a man could want, but he is psychologically paralyzed.
Right. He won't touch a weapon.
He refuses to hunt. He is terrified of weapons. He won't even look at a sword.
But the urge is still there. Repression doesn't cure the sickness. It only bottles it up. And one night, his wife notices how restless he is. She convinces him to go out just for a little while to clear his head. She doesn't know about the curse.
So Julian goes into the dark forest, and this sequence, it is pure nightmare logic.
It's like a fever dream.
If you've ever had a dream where you try to punch someone and your arms are made of jelly, this is it. Flaubert turns nature itself into a mocking force.
Nothing works.
Julian tries to shoot a boar. He misses. He shoots at a wolf. The wolf just trots away, looking back at him. He is suddenly surrounded by hyenas, panthers, monkeys, bears.
And they don't attack?
No. He throws his weapons at them, but the arrows just flutter to the ground like leaves. His sword shatters. The animals don't attack him. They just surround him in a tight circle, mocking him, brushing against his legs, breathing on him. He is suffocating in this parade of ghostly and vulnerable beasts.
It is the complete inversion of his power. The great hunter, the master of life and death, is rendered entirely impotent by the very nature he tried to conquer. He returns to his palace just as the sun is coming up, utterly humiliated, vibrating with a rage and frustration he cannot satisfy.
And this is where the trap of fate snaps shut. While he was out in the woods having this nightmare, two old, ragged beggars arrived at the palace.
His parents.
It's his parents. They have been searching for him for years, crossing the world. His wife recognizes them from Julian's descriptions, feeds them, and insists they sleep in the master bed to rest.
Flaubert's staging here is so precise. We have to look at how he uses light and architecture to build the horror.
It's terrifying. Julian creeps back into his own bedroom. It's dark, lit only by the early dawn light filtering through the stained glass windows. He creeps up to the bed, leans over to kiss his wife, and his lips brush against a coarse beard.
The psychological snap in that moment is devastating.
He thinks his wife is sleeping with another man. All that repressed rage, all that bloodlust from the forest, it just explodes. He absolutely loses his mind.
He gives in to it.
Draws his dagger and just starts stabbing wildly into the darkness, howling like a wild beast. Then he stops. The bodies are still. He hears the death rattle, and suddenly he hears the distant roar of the black stag in the forest.
The curse is fulfilled.
His wife runs into the room with a candle. By the light of her torch, he looks down, and Flaubert describes this horrific detail. The red light from the stained glass window is falling perfectly across the massive pools of blood on the white sheets. He gently lifts the head of the old man and sees the glassy, dying eye of his own father.
He has tried his entire life to outrun the curse, and by running, he ran straight into it. The irony is suffocating. This is the Freudian nightmare realized.
He abandons everything. He doesn't make excuses. He leaves the palace, his wife, his wealth. He becomes a beggar shunned by everyone once they hear his story.
A total outcast.
Eventually, he decides to dedicate the rest of his miserable life to serving others. He finds a treacherous, violent river where no one dares to cross, and he builds a crude ferry. He lives in a freezing mud hut, rowing travelers across the dangerous water for scraps of food.
This is his penance. Total self-abnegation. He seeks out the harshest, most punishing environment to erase his ego. He goes from being the center of the world to being the scum of the earth by choice.
Which sets up the final scene.
Yes, the visceral, transcendent final scene.
One night, in the middle of a screaming hurricane, he hears a voice calling his name from across the river. He rows out into the black, churning water, and waiting on the other side is a leper.
But Flaubert describes him with this unsettling majesty.
Yeah, he has the majesty of a king, despite his face being like a plaster mask with eyes like glowing coals. Julian brings him across the terrifying water, brings him into the freezing mud hut.
And the leper's demands escalate, testing the absolute limits of Julian's charity and his disgust.
First, the leper demands Julian's last scrap of food, a crust of black bread and bacon. He eats it, leaving leper stains and saliva on the bowl.
Gross.
Then the leper says, "I am cold." Julian lights a fire with his last bits of fern, but the leper is shivering violently, his skin oozing, his breath like a thick, nauseating fog.
And then he asks for more.
The leper whispers, "I am like ice. Come near me." So Julian gets into the bed of dead leaves next to him, and the leper says, "No, take off your clothes so I can have the heat of your body."
It is the ultimate sacrifice of the physical self. Flaubert focuses on the mechanics of disgust. Julian is overcoming the most profound human revulsion out of pure selfless duty. He is finally using his body to give life instead of taking it.
Julian strips completely naked and lies down on the leaves. He pulls the leprous, rotting body against his own. Flaubert writes that Julian pressed mouth to mouth, chest to chest, and in that moment, the leper embraces him tightly.
The transformation.
Suddenly, the leper's eyes shine like stars, his breath smells like roses, the roof of the mud hut flies off into the night sky, and the leper transforms into Jesus Christ, who carries Julian up into the blue expanse of heaven.
It's an incredible climax. The narrative arc moves from the ultimate sin of violence and ego to the ultimate act of charity and ego death. Julian escapes the horror of his fate through absolute, terrifying surrender.
Exactly. It's about letting go completely. Julian achieves grace by giving up control. But Flaubert's final story in this collection features characters desperately trying to do the exact opposite.
Right, they want total control.
They are trying to manipulate fate through ultimate control and political maneuvering.
Which brings us to the third and final tale, Herodias. After the exhausting mythic journey of Julian, Flaubert wrote in a letter that he wanted to explore the biblical story of John the Baptist.
Right.
Or, as he refers to him using the Hebrew name, Iochanan. But Flaubert wasn't interested in a simple morality play or a religious tract. He wanted to focus on the geopolitical cowardice of King Herod Antipas, facing off against his incredibly manipulative wife, Herodias.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Flaubert takes a story that everyone knows from Sunday school, the dancing girl in the head on a platter, and turns it into this gritty, claustrophobic, complex political thriller.
To really grasp the tension Flaubert builds, we have to map the political chessboard at the Machaerus Citadel. Let me explain the mechanics of the setting.
Go for it.
The Machaerus fortress is built on a basalt peak, surrounded by deep, impassable valleys near the Dead Sea. It is a physical manifestation of Antipas's mind, heavily fortified, but completely isolated and full of dark, hidden fears.
He's trapped.
Antipas, the tetrarch, is trapped there, and he is terrified of absolutely everything.
Let's break down exactly what he's terrified of, because the politics here are a powder keg. First, he's standing on the roof at dawn, looking out over the desert, and he can see the campfires of the Arab armies massing on the horizon.
And why are they there?
Because he divorced the Arab king's daughter to marry Herodias, who was actually the wife of his own half-brother. So the Arabs are deeply offended and ready to attack.
On top of that external threat, he is terrified of his imperial bosses, the Romans. The Roman proconsul of Syria, Vitellius, is arriving that very day to audit his armories and his loyalty. If Antipas looks weak, Rome will strip him of his power.
Another threat.
And then you have the internal Jewish factions, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, who despise Antipas's rule, his adoption of Roman customs, and his illegitimate marriage.
He's basically playing a massive game of Jenga, and every faction is trying to pull out the bottom block.
That's a great way to put it.
But above all of these political threats, the thing Antipas is most terrified of is the man he has locked in a pit in the center of the courtyard, the prophet Iochanan.
John the Baptist. He is terrified of him because Iochanan has been publicly condemning Antipas's incestuous marriage to Herodias.
He's stirring up trouble.
The prophet is inciting the crowds, threatening a rebellion. But Antipas is also afraid to kill him, fearing divine retribution or that executing a holy man will trigger a massive uprising. He's paralyzed by indecision. He just wants to keep him in the hole and ignore him.
But Herodias is not paralyzed. She is a political survivor. And Flaubert portrays her brilliantly. He doesn't show her as a passionate, irrational, or hysterical woman.
No, she's very calculated.
She is cold, calculating, and ruthlessly ambitious. She sees the prophet not as a religious figure, but as an existential political threat to her power, and she is furious that Antipas is too weak to just execute him.
It's really important to contrast Flaubert's approach here with Oscar Wilde's famous play Salome, which came out a couple of decades later.
Oh yeah, they're very different.
Wilde focused heavily on Salome, the daughter, and her twisted erotic obsession with the prophet. Wilde made it a story of perverted lust. But Flaubert's lens is entirely on the mother, Herodias.
Salome is just a tool in this version.
In Flaubert's story, Salome is essentially a blank slate, a pawn. She is a weapon carefully deployed by Herodias to manipulate the men around her.
And the atmosphere Flaubert builds to set this trap is overwhelming. It's pure sensory overload. You feel the sheer pressure cooker environment of this citadel, the blistering heat of the Dead Sea, the smell of sulfur wafting up from the valley, the claustrophobia of the stone walls.
It's stifling.
When the Romans arrive, it's a massive flex of imperial power. Vitellius shows up with his guards carrying the fasces.
Let's explain what the fasces are, because they are crucial to the psychology of the scene.
Yeah, please do.
They are bundles of wooden rods with an axe head emerging from the center. They were the symbol of a Roman magistrate's power to enact capital punishment.
So it's a threat.
By bringing them into Antipas's fortress, Vitellius is wordlessly saying, I have the power of life and death here, not you.
It's totally emasculating for Antipas.
Yeah.
And to make it worse, Vitellius brings his son, Aulus. And Aulus is a grotesque caricature of Roman excess and imperial decay.
He is gluttony personified.
Oh, it's revolting. During the feast, Aulus eats so much that he literally vomits on the floor, and then he immediately asks the servants for scrapings of marble to settle his stomach so he can keep eating.
Scrapings of marble.
Yeah. He's munching on snow brought from the mountains, eating nightingales and hashish wrapped in vine leaves. Meanwhile, Vitellius is demanding to inspect the secret vaults.
Antipas is sweating at this point.
Antipas has to open these subterranean chambers filled with weapons he was hiding, and this bizarre vault containing white horses with their manes dyed blue, their hooves wrapped in woven grass, kept in absolute darkness for a siege. It highlights just how deep Antipas's paranoia goes.
The tension keeps ratcheting up, layer by layer, until the inevitable confrontation in the courtyard. The Romans, the priests, the soldiers, everyone is gathered around this heavy bronze grate in the floor.
This scene gives me absolute chills. They open the trapdoor, and from the subterranean depths, this voice echoes out. Iokannan doesn't even look human anymore.
He's been down there a while.
He looks like a wild beast. He's covered in camel hair, his face like a brushwood thicket with eyes like glowing coals, and he unleashes this torrent of apocalyptic curses.
It's not just generic religious anger. It's highly specific, devastating political and moral critique, framed in the grand, terrifying language of the old prophets. Flaubert captures that biblical cadence perfectly.
Yes. He zeroes in on Herodias, who is watching from a balcony above.
Yeah.
He condemns her luxury in surgical detail. He screams about her silver mirrors, her ostrich feathers, her painted nails, her mother-of-pearl platforms.
He calls her out on everything.
He calls her a daughter of Babylon and prophesies that her shame will be exposed and that she will be torn apart by jackals. He completely strips away her royal facade in front of the Romans and the priests.
It's a profound public humiliation, and it forces Herodias' hand. She realizes that Antipas is too weak to act on his own, so she orchestrates the infamous birthday feast to force him into a corner.
The birthday feast for Antipas is pure chaos. Everyone is there, drunk on palm wine, arguing violently about theology and politics. The Romans are laughing at the Jews are arguing with each other.
Total pandemonium.
And right at the peak of the noise and the heat, Salome enters. But Flaubert doesn't describe the dance of the seven veils as a cheap burlesque. It's mesmerizing, almost supernatural.
It's hypnotic.
She dances like an entity from another world, imitating the size of a magic flower, bending backward until her chin touches the floor. She completely enchants Antipas. He's panting, sweating, promising her half his kingdom in front of everyone.
And that is exactly what Herodias planned. She built a psychological trap using lust and public pride. Because when Antipas asks Salome what she wants, she doesn't know.
She has asked her mom.
She runs to her mother, and then she comes back and lisps the words her mother taught her. I want you to give me, on a platter, the head
of Ewican. Antipas is completely trapped by his own public oath. The executioner, a towering, impassive Samaritan, goes down into the pit. There's a sickening wait. The crowd is silent. And then the executioner emerges with the severed head.
The tension breaks.
Flaubert ends the story the next morning with two of the prophet's disciples and an Essene carrying the heavy head away across the desert toward Galilee. And the final line of the story is them muttering that the head is very heavy. It's such a stark, brutal, physical image to end on.
It grounds the entire mythic story in the brutal for physical reality of a corpse. And it perfectly concludes the triptych. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to ask, why did Flaubert put these three entirely different stories together?
Yeah, what's the link?
You have a 19th century domestic tragedy about a servant, a medieval violent myth about a knight, and an ancient political epic about a king.
It seems so random at first glance. I mean, an uneducated servant praying to a parrot, a knight who kills his parents and hugs a rotting leper, and a king who cuts off a prophet's head to appease his wife. What is the structural through line?
Historically, critics have argued that they represent three distinct eras of human history: the modern, the medieval, and antiquity. But more importantly, they represent three distinct spiritual states.
Like the virtues.
Exactly. They map roughly onto the theological virtues, but twisted through Flaubert's cynical realist lens. You have faith, pure and unquestioning, in Félicité. You have hope and charity, driven to their absolute terrifying extremes in Julian.
And in Herodias.
In Herodias, you have the destructive absence of all virtue in a corrupted, cynical world, preparing the ground for a new spiritual era with the death of the old prophet.
It's like a massive architectural structure. So what does this all mean for us? For me, looking at Flaubert's journey from total burnout to this masterpiece, it's about the power of the craft itself.
It really is.
All three stories feature these spectacular, visceral endings that leave a lingering resonance. The giant parrot in the sky, the leper flying into heaven, the physical weight of the severed head carried across the desert. Flaubert used this incredibly diverse project to prove to himself that literature wasn't dead within him.
He proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
He proved that style, that crystalline, perfect, agonizingly crafted prose could elevate literally any subject. It didn't matter if it was a poor, illiterate woman's stuffed bird or a grand Roman feast. The attention to detail is what makes it profound.
Exactly. The act of creation, the intense discipline of observation and precise description was the medicine that cured his despair. When he was paralyzed by the idea of writing a great novel, he froze.
But shrinking the scope helped.
But when he forced himself to focus on the smallest gears of the pocket watch, he regained his mastery. He stopped worrying about his legacy and just focused on doing the small work perfectly.
We started this deep dive talking about a broken man staring at an empty page, doubting he could write a single sentence. And we ended up traveling through a lifetime of quiet devotion, a forest of bloody nightmares, and a desert fortress of political intrigue.
It is a profound testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and specifically, the creative spirit.
So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information in your life, or you are paralyzed by a creative block, or you hit that absolute wall in your career where you feel you have nothing left, remember Gustave Flaubert's remedy.
Just scale it back.
Take the pressure off the grand outcome, focus on the smallest detail in front of you, craft one good sentence, polish one pot, shrink the world down to the size of a pocket watch, and let the work itself guide you out of the darkness.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. If Flaubert's greatest, most perfectly distilled masterpiece was born entirely out of his absolute lowest moment of failure, grief, and self-doubt, what if our own periods of feeling stuck or empty aren't actually roadblocks at all?
That's an interesting way to look at it.
What if the burnout isn't the end of the road, but the necessary incubation period for the best work of our lives?
That is something to sit with. Maybe the mortar hasn't failed. Maybe you're just mixing a much stronger batch. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.